Hi there, guys. Hey, I am going back to part 2 of diabetes, and this is a busy screen, but I really want you to get this concept because we've heard of insulin resistance, and I want to break it down a little bit. So, pre-diabetes always turns into diabetes unless you change your habit. And diabetes is something where you absolutely need to start taking in insulin because your pancreas no longer can do it. It's pooped. It's exhausted. So pre-diabetes is you're still producing insulin, but you're not doing a very good job of getting your glucose down, so your blood sugars are a little bit high. So let's break this down. The average person, if we look over here on the left-hand side of the screen, takes in 31 teaspoons per day of sugar. Whoa, that's a lot. And that will ultimately lead to insulin resistance, and we'll talk about that in a second, but that leads to pre-diabetes, which is defined as your blood sugars being between 100 and 125 milligrams per deciliter. Now, many of you have heard of the term A1C. This is a measure of how much sugar in your system in the last 3 to 4 months. And 5.7 to 6.4, that's pre-diabetes. You definitely want to be lower than 5.7 normally. Now when you keep moving down the chain, diabetes now is when your blood sugars are 126 milligrams over deciliter or higher, and your A1C is over 6.5. So that gives you a way to measure what's been happening with yourself. Now come on back over to the left where it says high carbohydrate and frequent eating. That's what we just talked about in the last diabetes 1 session. That you're going to really cause that pancreas to produce way too much insulin if you are eating high carbohydrates, particularly remember the simple carbs that turn directly into sugar, and or if you're just frequently eating, even though you may not be eating a ton of carbohydrates, collectively you're eating enough during the day and you're never giving your body a break. So under prediabetes you see that little pink circle and you see that arrow. That is like a dial where your insulin is like, whoa, it's increasing 5 to 7 times the amount it should, because it has to. There's so much sugar in the system. And what's happening now is the sugar, which is that red box, the red cube. I've never seen a red sugar cube, but I thought it stood out a little bit better. It turns then to fat. There is no other option, you guys. If you cannot get that sugar into the cells, guess what? You start turning into fat. And I've had people tell me, oh Kelly, you can't get fat from eating donuts. Oh my gosh. Yes, you can. Now, because this insulin is so revved up here, it's 5 to 7 times the normal amount, it starts creating something in the body. You see it depicted by that little ladder where it says resistance. It starts creating something called insulin resistance. Again, as I mentioned earlier, insulin resistance is the first step to prediabetes. And you may be in insulin resistance for 5 or 10 years before you get even pre-diabetic. But what this basically says is the cells kind of stop listening to the insulin. There's a sluggish reaction. Normally there's a chemical that pops to the top of the cell that says, hey, come on in, glucose. But when the cell becomes insulin resistant, that little transporter mechanism stays hidden in the cell, and it doesn't go out and to expose itself on the cell wall, so the glucose can't find its happy home. It can't get in there. So this resistance is simply because the cells already have enough fuel. It's an over-fuel situation. And that then leads to further the pancreas says, oh my gosh, I may need to produce more insulin for the cells to start listening to me. And in fact, it's too late at that point. The cells have become resistant. Now what happens is, how does that show up in the body? These are the symptoms of insulin resistance. When you start to get frequent urination. Remember diabetes, the pass-through, that is the passing through of fluid. You start to urinate more often. The look-down test, what is that? Well, if you look down and you can see your toes, that's good. If you look straight down and all you can see is your tummy, that's bad. People who start getting thick around the waist are developing this insulin resistance. Brain fog. It's not just that you're anxious and nervous, although that may be tied in, it might be a function of your colon and your microbiome, but when you're in insulin resistance, your body is not working well, you're not getting the fuel into the cell, and or there's too much insulin in the body, and it starts having a negative impact on the liver and other organs, the adrenals. And if you're constantly hungry or have this intense craving, you are in an insulin resistant state. Or you're tired after meals, like boom, you get bonkers, you fall asleep 10 minutes later. Or, which is what we treat a lot in our clinic, peripheral neuropathy, tingling in the feet. And what is happening when your feet tingle? Well, these little nerves are being fed by these even littler arteries called the vasovasorum. And inside the vasovasorum, the capacity for the glucose to get out of these little cells into the nerve cell is being restricted and reduced. Why? Well, remember I said, when you have too much sugar in the vascular system for too long, you cause an inflammation and irritation on inside the artery walls, and they just stop working as well. So, goodness sake, somebody who is insulin resistant or pre-diabetic and certainly diabetic are going to start having decreased blood flow to the nerves in the feet. Nerves carry information about sensation. When those nerves are not fed properly by its little circulating arteries that are nicely, neatly wound around every nerve, if it's not getting the fuel, it feels numb. And then it starts to burn, and then it starts to hurt. And then you stop losing the ability to feel your feet because that data coming from the nerves cannot get to the brain. And that may afford you this capacity to be staggering about, losing your balance, not feeling the gas pedal or the brake pedal. And when you don't have good balance, you are a fall risk. And statistically, ladies and gentlemen, being a fall risk in your senior years simply means you are more prone to falling down and breaking your hip. Why is that a problem? Because oftentimes you can throw clots. Inside of the femur is fat. You can throw a clot and cause a stroke. You can throw a clot and cause a heart attack. The connection between fractures of the femur and end of life is very, very high. So look, let's do our best to stay out of insulin resistance and follow these fantastic ideas that we've talked about here in these last few minutes. And I know that information gives you commitment. And remember, when you're looking at your food, you can handle 3 teaspoons of sugar every 3 hours, every 4 hours. 3 teaspoons. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. You can handle that all day long. But people today are getting 10 times that in their day. Way too much. So look at the labels, see how much sugar is in those things, and make a decision to maybe eat a smaller portion, eat it at the end of the meal after your fats and your proteins, and start being aware and not completely ignorant to the fact that in a pop, you have more sugar in that pop than you need for 3 days. And then some people are drinking 2 or 3 or 4 a day. Beautiful thing is you can eat yourself out of that cravings for sugar, because as you go from insulin resistance to not, and your body is handling sugar as well, all these things on the right hand side, the frequent urination, the brain fog, the hunger, the craving, the being tired after meals, they start to decline as well. So that's the good news. All right, thank you guys for listening so much.